Deputy Sheriff's daughter cried theft. The crowd listened. Big Shaq didn't plead, didn't panic, just stood in the center of a lie loud enough to echo through a whole town. What started as a missing phone spiraled into something far darker: buried corruption, erased footage, and a legacy targeted by silence. But when power forgets who built the ground it stands on, the comeback doesn't knock, it demolishes. And what happens next isn't just justice, it's reckoning. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The heat hadn't hit yet. It was the kind of southern morning where the air still felt slow and forgiving, where cicadas hadn't started singing and everything from the porch swings to the mailbox flags held a kind of quiet dignity. A light breeze stirred the American flags that hung above doorways, and somewhere down the block, a Labrador barked at nothing at all. And into all that stillness walked a man who didn't quite belong but never claimed he did. Shaquille O'Neal, known here only as Big Shaq, moved through the town square like a man twice his size and half the attention. Dressed in worn jeans and a navy hoodie that dwarfed his frame, he greeted the staff at the Cornerstone Youth Center with a nod, offering no fanfare. He wasn't here for photos, he wasn't here for thanks, and he damn sure wasn't here to be seen. The youth center stood at the edge of Maplewood, a small Georgia town where the sidewalks cracked the same way they had since the 70s, and names meant more than deeds. Everyone knew the Hartwell family. Wade Hartwell, the deputy sheriff with a spotless uniform and a short leash on justice. His daughter, Remy, inherited his command of space. Wherever she walked, people noticed or they pretended not to. 17. Blonde. Viper smart and mean, in the way only privileged girls raised on silent power could be. She knew who her father was. She knew what that meant. And more importantly, she knew what people assumed when someone not like her made folks uncomfortable. The morning had started like any other Saturday. Back-to-school kits were being handed out on folding tables. Volunteers in matching shirts loaded backpacks with pencils and notebooks. Little kids bounced between games on the lawn, and parents made small talk over lukewarm coffee from a local sponsor. It was small-town Americana in its most performative piece. Shaq was supposed to be a silent donor. His name wasn't on any banner, not even whispered by the adults who organized this. That was his rule. But still, people stared. Not quite directly, not disrespectfully, just curiously. The kind of looks that said, "What's he doing here? And isn't he rich enough to be elsewhere?" He didn't flinch. He handed out backpacks like everyone else. Crouched to fist bump second graders. Complimented a lopsided face painting job, with a booming chuckle. He spoke less than most, but his presence filled whatever space he occupied, not because of his past, but because of his presence, solid, still. Remy watched him from across the lawn, arms crossed, standing next to a friend who laughed too loudly at her jokes. She had on a cropped denim jacket over a sundress that looked expensive, a phone in her hand that never left her side. The new iPhone, gold-plated case, monogram, her father's graduation gift for being responsible. Whatever that meant these days. She tilted her head. "Why's he acting like he's just some guy?" she muttered. Her friend shrugged. "He used to play basketball, right?" Remy scoffed. "Used to. That's the key word." Later, near the benches where the event started winding down, a brief commotion broke out. Remy's voice, shrill, sharp, and perfectly pitched, cut across the crowd. "Where's my phone?" Heads turned. Kids paused mid-hopscotch. The volunteers glanced at one another. And in the center of it all stood Remy, eyes narrowed, cheeks flushed not with panic but performance. "It was right here. I left it on this bench while I went to get lemonade. And he was the only one sitting here." A dozen heads turned to look. Shaq stood a few feet away, speaking to a little boy who was showing him how to work a rubber band slingshot. He hadn't heard her, not at first. He was the only one near it. Remy said again, louder this time. Shaq turned slowly. His face didn't tighten. He didn't get defensive. He just blinked, like the words took a moment to register. A man in his 40s with a clipboard muttered, "Scone now, Remy. Let's not jump." "I'm not jumping," she snapped. "He was right here." Shaq's voice was low, calm. "I ain't seen no phone." Remy's face hardened. Convenient. The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was dense. The kind of silence that folds into a room and sits on people's shoulders. No one said the thing they were all thinking. Not out loud. Not here. A woman near the snack table whispered, She's just panicking. A boy recording near the juice jugs didn't say anything. He just zoomed in. Shaq didn't flinch. He looked down, then up, then said again, I didn't see a phone. Remy's friend muttered, check his bag. Shaq looked at her, then at the crowd. His jaw tightened, not in threat, in disbelief. He stepped back. You want to check my bag? He asked, more to the group than anyone in particular. The man with the clipboard cleared his throat. Let's not turn this into something it's not. Remy's voice lanced through again. What is it then? Someone finally said her name firmly. Remy. She turned, not toward the speaker but toward the crowd. She blinked fast, then whispered just loud enough. I feel violated. That was it. That was the match on the gasoline. By noon, the story had made it to a local blog. By 3, an influencer reposted the clip with Is this who we donate to? By sunset, Shaq's name was trending with hashtags that twisted context into weapon. He didn't respond. Not online, not through his team, not even when the sheriff's office called and asked him to stop by. He showed up. On time. Alone. Remy's father didn't arrest him. Of course not. But he asked the question slowly. Careful not to accuse, careful not to say too little. Either. Shaq answered, his voice even. He didn't ask for lawyers, didn't bring one, just said what was true. No, I didn't see her phone. No, I didn't touch her bag. Yes, I sat on that bench, but I didn't see anything on it. The deputy stared at him for a long time, then said, you know how this looks. Shaq's smile was soft, tired. Yeah, he said. I do. Outside, the youth center still stood. But something felt colder now. People walked past a little faster. Didn't wave quite the same. And the people who used to whisper thank yous to Big Shaq behind closed doors now whispered other things in wider spaces. The phone hadn't been found. The accusation hadn't been retracted. And for a town that started that morning pretending it was at peace, something uglier had finally stirred. The sun was dipping low when the footage first hit local feeds. A shaky phone video, 32 seconds long, captured Remy Hartwell's voice like it was gospel and painted Shaquille O'Neal in a frame he never asked for. I left it right here. He was the only one sitting there. It didn't show the missing phone. It didn't show any theft. But it showed just enough, her face, pale with accusation. His still and unreadable. And in a town like Maplewood, sometimes stillness is taken as guilt, not grace. The video spread fast, first on the school's private group chats, then onto Facebook pages, with names like Heart of Maplewood and Our Kids, Our Future. By nightfall, a local digital outlet ran with it. Teen claims former NBA star took her phone during charity event. The piece was thin on facts and thick on suggestion. No confirmation from the sheriff's office. No statement from Shaq. But the headline didn't need weight to land. Inside his guest house on the edge of town, the same modest space he stayed in whenever visiting the youth center, Shaq sat at the kitchen table, his massive hands resting over his phone. It hadn't rung much, not yet. A few texts, some from old teammates, others from friends in media circles, all variations of the same thing. You good? Want me to say something? He didn't reply to any of them. Instead, he scrolled through the footage himself, watched the moment her eyes pointed at him, watched the way the crowd shifted, subtly, as if preparing for a confrontation that never came, watched his own face, calm, steady, quiet, and wondered what they saw when they looked at it now. A threat? A stranger? He hadn't taken the phone. That wasn't even up for debate, at least not in his mind. But the question wasn't whether he'd done it. It was whether enough people wanted to believe he had. Remy Hartwell hadn't retracted her accusation. In fact, she'd leaned into it. By Monday morning, she'd posted a filtered photo on Instagram with a caption that read, "Don't let your guard down, even at charity events." The comments were a mix of sympathy and skepticism. Some rallied to her defense. "So sorry, babe. Some people are disgusting." Others more cryptic. "You sure it wasn't just lost?" But Remy wasn't backing off. And her father, Deputy Wade Hartwell, wasn't saying much either. Not to the press. Not to his colleagues. Not even to Shaq. The sheriff's department released a single-line statement. "At this time we are looking into the report of a missing personal item, and will follow all leads accordingly." It wasn't an accusation. But it wasn't a defense either. At the youth center, whispers grew louder than the kids. Volunteers exchanged loaded glances. Parents asked subtle questions with sharp edges. And kids, the same ones who had hugged Shaq just days earlier, now looked at him with a mix of confusion and careful distance. He didn't blame them. People don't always know how to process disappointment, especially when it's engineered. Later that afternoon, the youth center director, a woman named Loretta Baines, asked if she could talk. They sat on the back porch, the kind of place where you couldn't lie to yourself because the wind didn't let you. Loretta was kind, sharp, had been running the center since before Maplewood had sidewalks. She was one of the few people in town who knew exactly who had built the place, and who never asked for credit. Her voice was soft but carried weight. "You sure you didn't see that phone, Shaq?" He looked at her without blinking. "I'm sure." She nodded once. "Good, then I'll stand with you, even when others don't." He didn't thank her. He didn't need to. The silence between them was solid, not heavy, just honest. Still, she hesitated before speaking again. "But you should know. Wade's talking about checking security footage." Shaq leaned back slightly. "There was a camera?" Loretta's face tightened. "Not one of ours. The bakery next door. Angle's bad, but people are pushing for something. Anything." Shaq didn't respond. He didn't have to. They both knew what she wasn't saying. That even when the truth is boring, people will stretch it just to give it weight. The next day, the footage surfaced. It was grainy, distant, and captured the corner of the youth center's lawn. You could barely make out figures, but you could see the bench. The moment Remy walked away, the moment Shaq sat down, and then nothing. No phone, clearly visible. No theft, just time passing. And yet, that became its own controversy. A local commentator posted, "Too convenient. Why is there no angle showing him placing it back?" Another wrote, "He could have passed it to someone. Doesn't prove anything." Truth wasn't the point anymore. Narrative was. But then the twist. 3 days after the incident, a high school junior named Clay Donahue stepped forward with a quiet Facebook post. It read, "I found a phone in my backpack. I think it's Remy Hartwell's. I have no idea how it got there. I didn't check my stuff until today. Sorry." Screenshots exploded across town. Clay wasn't close to Shaq, had never even spoken to him. No one could spin it into a cover-up. Remy didn't respond publicly. Her account went dark. Her father issued a short statement. "We appreciate the resolution and hope to move forward as a community." Shaq said nothing. Still, the silence became its own gravity. Not empty, loaded. And the town felt it. Some people apologized in passing. Others avoided eye contact altogether. The apology was never direct, never official, never full. Shaq didn't need it, because Maplewood had already said enough. And what it whispered between the headlines, between the glances, between the paused conversations, when he walked by, was louder than any accusation could ever be. And now, there were sides. On one hand, there were those who stood by Shaquille O'Neal. Big Shaq, the man who helped fund half the town's youth programs, who paid for HVAC units when the elementary school couldn't afford winter heat, who showed up to church picnics without bodyguards, and helped flip burgers behind the grill. They remembered the Shaq who never asked for credit, never made announcements, just helped. But on the other side, doubt. Not loud, just sharp. Fame changes people. You never really know someone that rich. I'm just saying, where there's smoke. Those phrases slithered through diners, over grocery aisles, in PTA meetings. No one shouted. Maplewood wasn't the kind of town that argued out loud. It was the kind that smiled while stepping sideways. The kind that believed manners were proof of morality. And that made it even more dangerous. At the sheriff's office, the conversation behind closed doors was cautious. They weren't filing charges. Not officially. The questions had been asked. One deputy, a younger guy named Travis Bell, had reportedly visited Shaq's guest house for a friendly chat. No paperwork filed, no audio recorded. Just a sit-down that left Shaq sitting stiffer than usual on his front steps later that evening. He didn't tell anyone about it. Not even Loretta. But Brent, his longtime assistant, noticed the difference. Brent had worked with Shaq for 8 years, had followed him through commercial shoots, real estate meetings, and a dozen charitable projects that never made headlines. He'd seen the man deal with big egos, media stunts, corporate doublespeak, but he'd never seen Shaq like this. Quieter, not defeated, just watchful. "You want me to call the lawyers?" Brent asked one morning, watching Shaq rinse out a mug at the sink. Shaq shook his head. "They don't know this town. Not like I do. But this town's starting to act like it doesn't know you either, Brent said, the words heavier than intended. Shaq didn't respond. He just kept washing the cup, as if scrubbing hard enough might erase what had been said. Meanwhile, Remy Hartwell's version of events began to mutate. First it was, he took it. Then, maybe he slipped it into someone else's bag. Then he intimidated me. By the time a regional paper ran a story on the emotional toll of high-profile accusations, Remy was in full victim mode. She posed in soft light portraits, wrapped in her father's flannel shirt, eyes glistening in just the right way. The quote below her photo read, "I don't feel safe, not around him, not anywhere anymore." There was still no phone, no footage, no charge. But that didn't seem to matter. Suspicion didn't need evidence, just repetition. Within a week, 2 minor sponsors of the youth center pulled their funding. Quiet withdrawals, polite emails. In light of current controversy, we're reallocating resources. Loretta didn't need to ask what that meant, and neither did Shaq. He just nodded when she told him, then went back to repainting the back fence that had peeled from the last storm. The real gut punch came when the high school's athletic director, someone Shaq had personally helped get a grant 2 years earlier, stopped returning calls. There was an upcoming fundraiser. Shaq had agreed to match donation. But suddenly, the school was reassessing partnerships for optics. Brent slammed his phone down after the call. They were happy to take the money. But now they're acting like you're toxic. Shaq didn't flinch, just sat down on the edge of the center's basketball court, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on nothing. Maybe, he said quietly, they were always looking for an excuse. Even the kids had started keeping a little distance. Not all of them. Some still ran to him, still trusted their instincts. But others lingered near their parents' opinions. You could feel it in the air. The hesitant greetings, the eyes that darted away too quickly, the way laughter dimmed when he entered a room. And then there was the worst moment of all. A flyer, taped to the youth center door one night. "We don't want thieves teaching our kids morals." Typed in bold. No name, no contact. Just a message left like a wound. Brent tore it down before Shaq arrived. But someone else had already seen it. A volunteer named Marcy, who called Loretta crying. "This isn't what this place was built for," she whispered. "I don't want my name attached if this becomes a circus." Loretta told her to take a break. Then she sat alone in her office and wept. Not because the town had turned, but because it had done so with such ease. That evening, Shaq walked the perimeter of the youth center. Slow steps, checking locks, picking up trash. He did it every night, but tonight he lingered longer near the front door. Looked at the clean spot where the flyer had been. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Inside his guest house later, Brent tried again. "We can go public, Shaq. A press conference. Tell your side." Shaq just shook his head. "If you stay quiet, people will fill the silence with their own story." Shaq looked up then, calm but firm. "Then let him. Because their version ain't mine. And truth? Truth's got longer legs." Brent hesitated. "You really think this'll blow over?" Shaq didn't answer right away. He glanced out the window, where the porch light cast long shadows across the grass. "No," he finally said. "But I think it'll reveal what needed revealing." And somewhere in town, under her parents' roof, Remy Hartwell scrolled through her notifications. Her posts were still being shared, still gaining sympathy, still earning her attention. But even she couldn't shake one quiet truth. She knew he hadn't taken her phone. And now she was on thin ice too. But couldn't turn back without cracking it. Because in a hot town like Maplewood, ice melts fast. And lies? They slip faster than you think. The knock came mid-afternoon, when the air outside was thick with humidity and tension. Brent assumed it was another reporter or a delivery left on the wrong doorstep. But when he opened the door to the youth center's side office, he froze for half a second, then instinctively stepped aside. The woman didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped in, small and deliberate, with silver streaks curling from beneath a wide-brimmed canvas hat, and eyes the color of old steel. She wore weathered boots, carried a tote over one shoulder, and cradled a thick green binder against her chest like it held bones. "Is Mr. O'Neill here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't rude, but it wasn't warm either. It was the tone of someone who'd seen too much and had time for nothing but the truth. Shaq came in from the back office, towel slung around his shoulder from mopping the back hallway himself. He clocked her in a heartbeat, the posture, the way she scanned the room for exits, the way her fingers never left the binder. "Military? No. Older. Sharper. Something different. Shaquille O'Neal, she said, offering a firm but brief handshake. Name's Delaney Brooks. You don't know me, but I know enough about you. Shaq glanced at Brent, who shrugged, then offered Delaney a seat. She didn't take it. This isn't about the phone, she said without preamble, placing the binder on the table with a soft thunk. It never was. Shaq crossed his arms. Go on. Delaney opened the binder slowly. Inside were tabs, color-coded and neatly labeled in tight handwriting. One read, Hartwell, internal conduct. Another, storage protocol, body cam footage. A third, redacted files. 8. I've worked civil rights cases in Mississippi, Chicago, Florida. 15 years of chasing breadcrumbs no one wanted found. Retired early. Thought I was done. But then a colleague sent me an article about a girl, a phone, and a man too big to vanish quietly. She tapped the binder. I started digging. Shaq didn't interrupt. He didn't ask why. He just nodded for her to keep going. See, I don't care about phones, but I care about patterns. And what I found inside your little sheriff's department. She pulled out a printout with a timestamp from the day of the event. This here is from Deputy Travis Bell's body cam log. Brent leaned in. The one who came by here that night. Delaney nodded. According to protocol, all interactions, especially ones involving public figures, are recorded and stored automatically. And technically, this one was. She pulled another sheet, a frame grab from video footage, showing the outside of Shaq's property. But everything after this frame, gone. No audio, no backup, just static and then a conveniently timed system error. Shaq's jaw clenched slightly. Convenient. Delaney flipped to the next tab. It gets better. 4 other logs from that week have similar glitches. All around the same department. Same 2 deputies. And one of them just happens to be the brother-in-law of Wade Hartwell. Brent sat down hard. So it's an inside job. Delaney raised a brow. You ever seen corruption loud and sloppy in a town like this? No. It's quiet, clean, like dust swept under a rug no one's allowed to lift. She leaned forward now. What I don't get yet is the why. The motive. Why set you up? Why push this girl to make the claim? There's no clear payout. No money trail. Shaq rubbed the back of his neck, mind circling. Unless this wasn't about me. Not really. Delaney gave a slight nod, like he'd reached the edge of a cliff she'd been staring at too. That's my gut. I think you were a pawn in someone else's plan. She pulled out a series of email screenshots. 2 months ago, a private investment firm tried to buy this youth center property. Town board turned it down. Public vote came up short. But guess who supported the sale? She pointed to one name in the email chain. Wade Hartwell. Shaq blinked. He wanted the land. Delaney nodded slowly. Still does. And your ownership, your presence, keeps it untouchable. But if you go down in scandal, that land goes into review, funding dries up, youth center closes, and Hartwell gets what he wants, Brent murmured. Delaney sat down now, her voice lower. He's been after a private security contract, wants to turn this part of town into a community vigilance zone. New funding, new partners, but for that, he needs the center gone. And you. She looked at Shaq. You're in the way. The room went still. The air thickened with the weight of realization. Shaq stood, slow and heavy. He walked to the window, looking out at the half-painted mural, where kids' names had been outlined in chalk earlier that week. So this wasn't about a lost phone. This was about power. Delaney stood too. It usually is. Shaq turned back, calmer than he had any right to be. You got proof enough to take this to court? Delaney exhaled. Not yet. But I know where the rest lives. And I've still got a few people who owe me favors in Tallahassee. Shaq nodded. You need anything from me? She paused. Just one thing. Don't stay silent. They built this thinking you'd retreat, that you'd play polite. But if you want this place to stand, you're gonna have to speak. He gave her a long look, then a quiet smile. I don't raise my voice. Delaney returned the smile, faint but fierce. Good. Just raise the truth. As she packed her binder, Brent asked softly, Why'd you even come? Why this case? Delaney paused at the door. Because I've seen too many men like him win, and I'm tired of that story. Then she was gone, back into the heat, binder clutched to her chest like a weapon. Shaq stood in the quiet for a long time, the wheels turning. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. This was about protecting what he built. And now, he finally knew where the fire was coming from. It was a Tuesday morning when Delaney Brooks returned to the local high school with a notepad, a prepaid burner phone, and questions that had been keeping her up for 2 nights. The receptionist at the front desk gave her a polite but wary glance, the kind reserved for strangers who ask too many questions. Delaney introduced herself as a privacy consultant conducting an audit on behalf of a nonprofit. It wasn't entirely a lie. She was there for the phone. Not the one that had allegedly gone missing, but the one that had been found, and the trail it left behind. Delaney had traced the phone's last GPS ping to the school's athletic locker room, 24 hours after the alleged theft. According to the school's access logs, Remy Hartwell had been there during that window. The problem? None of this had made it into the sheriff's report. She requested access to the school's security footage, citing her audit. The IT administrator hesitated, but eventually agreed to let her review the logs, under supervision. As she scrolled through the footage, Delaney noted the timestamps. There were gaps, brief, but noticeable, enough to raise suspicion. Later that evening, as Delaney sat in her motel room, sifting through notes and cross-referencing timelines, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find a janitor in his late 50s, wearing a worn uniform, and a name tag that read Julius. "You're the lady asking questions about the phone?" he asked, his voice low. Delaney nodded cautiously. He glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside and handing her a small flash drive. "You didn't get this from me," he said, his eyes serious, "but I think you'll want to see it." Delaney plugged the drive into her laptop. The file was labeled Town Square Cam 3. As the video played, her eyes widened. The footage showed the town square on the day of the event. Remy Hartwell appeared on screen, glancing around nervously. She approached a bench where Shaquille O'Neal's bag sat unattended. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a phone, and slipped it into the side pocket of Shaq's bag before walking away quickly. Delaney replayed the footage, ensuring she hadn't misinterpreted what she saw. The implications were clear. Remy had planted the phone. The next morning, Delaney met with Shaq at the youth center. She showed him the footage. He watched silently, his expression unreadable. "This changes everything," Delaney said. Shaq nodded slowly. "It does, but we need to be careful. This town won't take kindly to being shown they were wrong." Delaney agreed. They decided to approach the situation strategically, ensuring the truth came out without causing unnecessary harm. They arranged a meeting with the school board and presented the evidence. The board members were stunned, their faces a mix of shock and embarrassment. An internal investigation was launched immediately. News of the footage spread quickly. The local media picked up the story, and public opinion began to shift. People who had doubted Shaq started to question their assumptions. Apologies came in, some sincere, others perfunctory. Remy Hartwell issued a public statement, admitting to her actions and expressing remorse. Her father, Deputy Wade Hartwell, resigned from his position, citing personal reasons. The youth center regained its sponsors, and community support surged. Shaq continued his work, more determined than ever to make a positive impact. Delaney prepared to leave town, her job complete. As she packed her things, Shaq approached her. "Thank you," he said. Delaney smiled. "Just doing what's right." As she drove away, Delaney reflected on the events. In a town where secrets were buried deep, the truth had finally surfaced, all because someone dared to dig. Shaquille O'Neal didn't release the footage. Not yet. Instead, he walked the town. He bought groceries at the local market, his towering frame navigating the narrow aisles with practiced ease. He attended Sunday services at the small church on Main Street, his deep voice joining the hymns. He visited the youth center daily, engaging with the children, offering guidance and support. He made himself visible, a constant presence in the community. People noticed. Some met his gaze, offering nods or tentative smiles. Others looked away, their expressions unreadable. The town's true nature began to surface. Who they trusted, who they feared, who they believed deserved dignity. Remy Hartwell's father, Sheriff Wade Hartwell, tightened his control. He leaned on local outlets to bury any stories about his daughter. He pressured school officials to remain silent. He attempted to maintain the narrative. But truth has a way of emerging. Someone leaked the school's GPS logs. The data showed that Remy's phone had last pinged in the school's athletic locker room, 24 hours after the alleged theft. Remy had access. She'd been there. Yet, This information had been omitted from the official report. The tide began to turn. Community members started to question the initial narrative. Conversations shifted. Doubts emerged. The town, built on stories, began to rewrite its own. Shaq remained silent, allowing the truth to speak for itself. He continued his walks, his visits, his engagements. He waited, because he knew that in a town built on stories, the truth would eventually find its voice. It was the kind of evening when the sky held too much weight. Clouds low and heavy. A strange stillness settled over the town, like it knew something was coming. The old Baptist chapel at the heart of Maple Ridge had never seen such a crowd. Pews overflowed. Folding chairs lined the back. Even the standing room buzzed with held breath. What they called Community Reconciliation Night on the flyers didn't fool anyone. This wasn't going to be soft. This was going to split something wide open. Delaney Brooks stood at the front, still wearing her long green coat, the same one she wore when she first stepped into Shaq's life with that binder of hers. Behind her, the stained glass cross flickered in purples and reds. As the outside lights dimmed, she had set up a screen right in front of the pulpit. Old projector humming. No choir, no prayer, just waiting. Shaquille O'Neal walked in just before it started. Not late, not early. Perfectly on time. He wore black slacks, a pressed button-up, no tie, his face unreadable, but not cold, calm. That kind of calm that made people lean in instead of back away. People parted as he passed. Some nodded, some whispered, some stared at the floor. Brent was with him, his assistant, quiet as always. But even Brent seemed sharper tonight, like he knew this wasn't just a meeting. This was history. And then the sheriff arrived. Wade Hartwell strode down the center aisle like he still owned every inch of this place. In full uniform, silver badge gleaming, chin high, Remy followed close behind him, her face pale but steady. She wore white. Maybe a choice, maybe a tactic. Her hair was curled and perfect, her lips pressed tight. No more tears now, just tension. They didn't sit in the front. That would have been too bold, even for Wade. But they sat close enough that everyone saw them, and Remy knew it. She didn't look left or right, she just stared straight ahead, like this was a courtroom, and she was rehearsing innocence. Delaney took the mic. Her voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. Truth usually isn't. No one clapped. No one spoke. Delaney turned to the projector. Clicked. The screen came to life. Security footage, grainy but clear. The town square. That day, you could see Shaq handing out backpacks, laughing with kids, walking to his bag, and then, pause. Remy standing off to the side, glancing around. She steps forward, something small in her hand. She reaches near Shaq's bag, lingers, places it down, steps back. The room went dead silent. The projector kept rolling. A timestamp appeared. Remy's face drained. You could see it even from the fifth pew. Delaney let the footage play a few seconds longer, then clicked again. A new clip loaded. Bodycam audio. Static. Then footsteps. Then a voice. Deputy Martin. Everyone knew his voice. Just say it was him. We'll take care of the rest. Gasps. Then silence again. Delaney didn't look at the sheriff. She didn't have to. The room did. Shaq sat motionless, hands folded. Not smug. Not angry. Just watching. Remy shifted in her seat. Wade leaned forward, whispering something in her ear. But it was too late. The room had already decided. Delaney stepped forward again. This isn't just about a phone, or a false report. This is about the way power works when it thinks no one's watching. Someone in the back muttered, "Lord." Another stood. A woman in her 40s. School counselor. She didn't say anything. She just left. Walked out into the night, like she couldn't hold it anymore. Shaq stood now, not to speak. Just to stand. People turned toward him, waiting. He looked over the crowd. Some familiar faces, some strangers, and then looked directly at Wade Hartwell. No rage, no gloating, just a single nod. The kind of nod that says, "You see me now." Wade's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists in his lap, but he didn't move. Delaney finally spoke again. The footage was hidden. The GPS logs were edited, and someone in the department tried to scrub it all clean. She held up her binder. This is why stories matter more than statements, and why silence is never neutral. The chapel doors opened again. This time, it was the mayor. He walked straight down the aisle, past Wade, past Remy, past Delaney, right up to Shaq, held out his hand. Shaq shook it. Slowly. The crowd didn't cheer. They exhaled. A long collective breath that had been held since the day of the accusation. The meeting ended not with applause, but with a kind of solemn awe. People filed out slowly, whispering, glancing, recalibrating everything they thought they knew about the story, about the sheriff, about themselves. Remy didn't cry this time. She just sat there, shoulders curled in slightly, like the weight of everything finally landed. Wade stood last. He didn't say a word, didn't protest, didn't defend. He just walked out into the dark, his shadow stretching long behind him. Delaney closed her binder and walked over to Shaq. "You ready?" she asked. Shaq nodded. "I was born ready," he said, voice low, steady. They stepped out into the night together. Outside, the air smelled different, like something was finally clearing. The day after the church meeting, the town moved slower. Stores opened late. The coffee shop stayed half empty, even by lunchtime. At the courthouse, the flag flew at half-staff, not for a death, but maybe for an illusion finally buried. People didn't say much, but they watched everything. Shaq didn't issue a statement. He didn't post anything. He went home, made his protein shake like usual, walked his dog, sat on the porch and watched the world turn, quiet as ever. But Remy Hartwell woke up to a world she didn't recognize. Her name trended online, not in hashtags of support, but in waves of think pieces, side-by-side comparisons, footage replays, and comment threads full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. "Privileged much?" One read. "Your tears don't make a lie true," said another. But the worst were the ones that just quoted her father's deputy. "Just say it was him. We'll take care of the rest." The mayor had called for a public address. A way to begin healing, he said. The town needed closure, or at least a display of accountability. And so just 2 days later, the entire community gathered again. This time on the courthouse steps in the late afternoon sun. Remy stood at the podium, alone. No father at her side. Not today. The sheriff was being reviewed by state authorities. Her mother hadn't come. Her old friends had gone silent. Just her. And a tight blue blazer she'd never worn before. Cameras were there. Phones raised. Microphones clamped to metal stands, recording every breath. She cleared her throat. It was shaky. "I want to address what happened. About the phone. And the accusation I made against Mr. O'Neill." No one blinked. They were waiting for the words. The real ones. "I wasn't truthful," she said, voice thinner now. "I thought I lost my phone. I panicked. I assumed something that wasn't true. I didn't mean for it to go so far." A pause. Her hands trembled slightly on the edges of the podium. She took a breath like it might add strength, but it didn't. "I apologize." She said it fast. Almost swallowed it. "I apologize to Mr. O'Neill, and to the town, and to anyone who was hurt." Another pause. "I was scared," she added, as if that would explain everything. Behind the crowd, someone coughed. Someone else muttered. A breeze passed, but nothing shifted in the air. Shaq stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed. He didn't move, didn't nod, just listened. Remy looked out at the audience. Her eyes darted, searching for something to land on. A forgiving face, a hand of support. But they all looked the same now. Not angry, not hateful, just done. And then Shaq stepped forward. No cameras followed him. No reporters moved. He didn't walk to the podium. He just stepped close enough for her to hear him clearly. His voice didn't rise. It didn't waver, but it did carry. "I heard your apology," he said, "and I accept that you're trying." Remy swallowed hard. Her eyes welled, but not the same way they had on the news last week. "But forgiveness," he continued, "isn't the end. It's the beginning of your own reckoning." He let that hang. "Because when you tell a lie," he said, "it doesn't just hurt the one you lie about. It teaches the world something dangerous, that truth is optional, and power is enough." He looked at her then, not to shame, not to scold, but with something deeper. Sadness. Then, he turned and walked away. No mic drop. No applause. Just footsteps. Remy stood frozen. Her apology hung in the air like smoke. It didn't land. It just lingered, too insubstantial to hold. Later that evening, after the cameras left and the courthouse steps were empty, Delaney sat with Shaq on his porch. The sun had dipped below the trees. The breeze had turned cooler. She handed him a glass of sweet tea she'd brewed herself, though he joked it was more sugar than tea. She sat across from him, flipping her old green binder shut with a soft snap. "You did what most people don't," she said. Shaq raised a brow. "What's that?" "You let the truth speak louder than you." He didn't respond right away. Just looked out at the street where kids rode bikes again, like they always had. "I didn't need the truth to clear my name," he said finally. "I needed it to clear the air." Delaney nodded. "And now?" "Now," Shaq said, "she has to decide who she's going to be after this. Not for us. For herself." Silence sat with them comfortably. Not heavy now. Just honest. Delaney smiled. "Funny thing about redemption. It doesn't start with forgiveness. It starts with being willing to carry what you broke." Shaq looked at her, and not drop it again. They sat a while longer. And across town, Remy sat alone in her room, still dressed in that tight blue blazer, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed every few seconds. News alerts, missed calls, 100 unread texts. But she didn't touch it. She just kept hearing that voice. Forgiveness isn't the end. And somehow that hurt more than anything else. The resignation wasn't announced with a press conference. No badge on the desk. No televised apology. Sheriff Wade Hartwell simply didn't show up to work one morning. And by noon, the town clerk confirmed the rumors. His letter was short, 2 sentences, and a signature. The office was left quiet. His nameplate still fixed to the door, but his desk empty. For some, it was closure. For others, it was too little, too late. But no one was surprised. The federal agents hadn't worn jackets with letters. They'd come like auditors, briefcases, notebooks, crisp shirts, and even crisper questions. They weren't there just for Remy's case. They were there for the whispers, for the files that disappear, for the boys pulled over for matching descriptions, for the teachers who had tried to speak up and were transferred quietly. They were there for the rot beneath the badge, and the town knew it. Shaq didn't celebrate. He didn't even speak on it. Instead, the same day the sheriff's resignation was confirmed, he launched something unexpected. The Truth Trust, a community-funded initiative focused on teaching media literacy, legal rights, and digital truth verification. Its tagline was simple: not every voice gets heard, but every lie leaves footprints. He didn't fund it for lawsuits. He didn't want courtrooms filled. He wanted classrooms filled, with students who could ask smarter questions, who could smell spin from a mile away, who wouldn't have to rely on someone like him to come clean up after silence. Delaney helped him build the curriculum, bringing in old civil rights lawyers, digital privacy experts, and media watchdogs. It wasn't about left or right. It was about teaching the next generation to pause before reposting, to ask who benefits, and to never ever confuse virality with truth. Meanwhile, Remy vanished from the public eye. Her last public appearance had been that stiff apology on the courthouse steps. Since then, her social accounts were wiped. Her interviews disappeared from syndication. Her family home went up for sale. A quiet exit, people called it. A retreat, not punishment. Some said she was sent to live with an aunt. Others whispered about boarding school. But most stopped asking. Because the town had moved on. Not out of indifference, but necessity. A new school board passed a unanimous resolution called the Civic Truth Clause. It required that any student filing a serious accusation against staff or community members must cooperate with full transparency during investigation, and that malicious false reporting would carry consequences aligned with restorative justice principles, not suspension, not public shaming, but education, accountability circles, and community restitution. The message was clear. Dignity goes both ways. At Riverside High, where the story had first swirled through locker whispers and TikTok threads, the hallways felt recalibrated. Students still joked, still gossiped, but something had changed. When the assistant principal posted the new policy poster outside her office, someone had written in pen under it, "Because justice isn't just loud, it's learned." Shaq walked those hallways once more. Not as a suspect, not even as a legend, just as himself. A man who didn't disappear when the crowd did. He visited a civics class, sat quietly, while students debated the ethics of social media trials. When the teacher asked him if he had anything to add, he stood slowly and said, "Just remember, what you believe has power. Don't spend it cheap." And then he left. The paper that had first printed NBA star accused by deputy's daughter issued a front-page spread that following Sunday, but this time the photo wasn't grainy. It was full color, Shaq standing outside the new Truth Trust office, with a group of fifth graders, all smiling. The headline was short, but it echoed louder than any scandal: Legacy in Progress. And under it the subhead: From Accusation to Action, How One Man Stayed When the Storm Didn't. The town wasn't perfect now. It still had gaps, still had grudges, but it had memory, real, raw, and now written into its structure. Because the rebuild wasn't just about replacing names or policies. It was about finally telling the truth and teaching the next generation how to hold it. The story had stretched its way through headlines, hearings, hallway whispers, and heartfelt reckonings. But the final truth didn't come in a courtroom or church. It came from a cracked screen and a silence no one had thought to question. It was Delaney who uncovered it. Not with subpoenas or press leaks, but by asking a quieter question: did anyone ever file a claim with the phone company? In her line of work, truth often unraveled, not in confessions, but in paperwork, or the lack of it. She called the local branch, posing as a district consultant, reviewing insurance protocols for student safety. A long pause followed. Then a customer rep said plainly, "We never received a report of a stolen phone from Remy Hartwell or her guardian." That was the first flag. The second came when a tech at the same provider ran a routine internal check. The phone's registration data hadn't matched Remy at all. It was registered to a girl named Elise Paxton, 17, cheer captain, and just distant enough from Remy to avoid being looped in initially. Delaney reached out. Elise was hesitant at first, tight-lipped in the way that kids are when they've seen adults misuse secrets. But she agreed to meet. They sat across from each other at the diner on Main Street. Elise stirred her soda straw slowly, eyes darting toward the window every few seconds. Then she sighed and said what Delaney had already suspected. "She borrowed it for the party," Elise said. "She said her dad checks her messages, said she didn't want to risk it, so I let her use mine for the night." "What kind of party?" Delaney asked. Elise hesitated. "Not school approved." Delaney didn't press. She didn't have to. The footage had never been about theft. The phone wasn't evidence of a crime. It was a cover for one. The photos on it, as Elise reluctantly confirmed, showed underage drinking, boys in sheriff's department uniforms, and Remy, front and center, posing beside the official patrol vehicle her father often parked at home. No outright scandal, but enough impropriety, enough poor judgment, enough proximity to misuse of authority, that the wrong pair of eyes could have turned it into a headline, especially with a name like Hartwell attached. "So why plant it?" Delaney finally asked. Elise shrugged, voice almost ashamed. She panicked. The phone was missing after the party. She thought someone would find it, trace it. She figured if it looked like someone stole it, someone big, it would distract people from asking where it really went. And it had worked. For a while. But stories built on deflection never hold. Delaney didn't leak the photos, didn't forward them to the media. She gave them to Shaq in a plain envelope. No flourish, just facts. He read through the printouts slowly, then set them down without a word. He didn't ask for names, didn't demand more, just sat with it, quiet, absorbing. And then he said, "So it was never about me." Delaney nodded. "It never is. Not really. You were just visible." Later that week, a quiet memo went out from the sheriff's office, acknowledging improper use of department assets at a private event, and Sheriff Wade's earlier resignation was reclassified as voluntary retirement. No charges, no disciplinary hearings, just the kind of language governments use when they want closure without conversation. Remy didn't re-enroll at the high school. Her parents said she was pursuing alternative education. No one corrected them. No one asked. And Shaq? He went back to the youth center. Back to the kids who didn't care about articles or leaked audio, or green binders. They just wanted to learn how to shoot a free throw, how to build confidence, how to stop someone from stealing their dreams without stealing them back. On a Thursday afternoon, he stood in front of a group of middle schoolers doing mock interviews for career day. One asked if he was ever scared when people talked about him. He smiled and said, "Being scared isn't a problem. Staying scared is." Another asked if it was hard being famous. He replied, "Being known ain't the same as being understood. That's the hard part." They didn't know all the details of what had happened. They just knew he didn't leave, that he kept showing up, that he looked them in the eye and remembered their names. The phone that started it all was never recovered. Elise eventually deactivated the number. The device itself may have ended up in a locker, a ditch, maybe even the trash. But by then it didn't matter, because the phone was never the point. The point was how easily a lie could wrap itself in truth if no one stopped to ask questions. The point was how quickly a town could be swayed by suggestion, by familiarity, by the kind of comfort that disguises itself as credibility. But most of all, the point was legacy. And legacy, as Shaq had learned again and again, doesn't beg to be seen. It just keeps building, in conversations that weren't recorded, in programs that didn't trend, in kids who felt safe enough to ask questions no one else had time to answer. As the sun dipped behind the roof of the youth center, a little girl tugged on Shaq's sleeve. She was maybe 9, all braces and confidence. "You famous, right?" she asked. Shaq chuckled. "Something like that. So why do you come here?" He looked around at the basketballs rolling across the court, the homework spread out on folding tables, the laughter echoing off cement walls. Then he crouched beside her and said, "Because fame fades. But showing up? That sticks." She nodded like she understood. And maybe, somehow she did. In the end, the phone never rang again. "But the truth?" it echoed. "Some stories aren't just watched, they're warnings, echoes, and blueprints. If this one made you pause, then ask what else you've believed too quickly. Dig deeper, speak slower, and never let silence stand in for truth. Because the next time, the story might be yours, and what you do with it will echo louder than any headline."